Sanbatskano. I'm Peter Bittner. You're watching Talk With Me. Sanbatskano. Hello and welcome to Talk With Me. I'm your host, Peter Bittner. Today's guest is Ш.Энхтүвшин Damba, Director of the Wildlife Conservation Society, Mongolia.
Ш.Энхтүвшин Damba is the current director of the Wildlife Conservation Society, Mongolia, one of the foremost organizations fighting environmental degradation, wildlife trafficking, and other threats to Mongolia's biodiversity. Enke graduated from the School of Veterinary Medicine and Biotechnology at the Mongolian Agricultural University in 1999. In 2006, she graduated from the School of Veterinary Medicine at the University of California, Davis, with a master's degree in preventive veterinary medicine and epidemiology.
Thanks so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me for your show.
Of course, it's an honor to be here and have you with us on our show. Tell us, when did WCS Mongolia start?
Well, it's a long story. WCS Mongolia started officially in 2005, but before 2005, WCS scientists, one of the known, global known biologists, Dr. George Scheller, actually arrived in Mongolia in 1993. Okay. Since then, there have been a lot of visits from WCS headquarters in New York to Mongolia and doing research on ecology of different species, disease research, etc. And so it's been a while, up until 2005, that we established an office that is a local representative office in Mongolia.
Wow, and so WCS, Wildlife Conservation Society, is a global NGO, is that correct?
Yes,
okay.
So Wildlife Conservation Society is a global NGO that has country programs over 60 countries and implements over 500 programs around the globe. And one of the biggest region of WCS is, of course, in Africa because of the key species, elephants, rhinos, and their protection, conservation. The next largest territory is Asia. We have 15 countries in Asia, and then Latin America is the next largest country, region. So Mongolia is purely focusing on the grasslands and Gobi steppes, and key priority species that we focus are the migratory species, ungulates that are Holan, Goiter gazelle, Mongolian gazelle, Saiga antelopes. Those are our focal species for conservation and protection in Mongolia.
And where are those species located geographically in Mongolia?
So those are species that migrate in large areas. For example, Mongolian gazelle exists in the eastern part of Mongolia, mainly most of the gazelles. We have been doing research on Mongolian gazelle, especially Kork Olsen, who is our technical advisor. He has started Mongolian gazelle research back in 2000, and we estimated in 2005 almost 1.5 million Mongolian gazelle in the Sukhbatır Dornot, Khinty provinces of Mongolia. So the Holan and Goiter gazelle mostly in southern Gobi. So we have been doing research, especially coloring, studying their movement, studying their census, how big is the population. So about 35,000 Goiter gazelle and Holan are existing in South Gobi of Mongolia. And Saiga is another species that we are concerned. And you might have heard that there was a large outbreak of Saiga due to a disease which is called Pestidophytes ruminans, started in December of 2016 and continued over only 2 or 3 months period. We lost more than 60% of Saiga population, which was estimated around 15,000 at the time. And now only 3,000 of Saiga remaining in Mongolia. So this is a critical endangered species. On top of that, this is affecting and canceling over 2 decades of conservation activities. It's a big crisis. Yeah, so those are the species we are mostly focusing. And of course we do research on other species, like avian influenza surveillance in wild birds. So we have been working studying migration of wild migratory birds since 2005 in Mongolia, and we have been coloring, GPS tagging, but through our research we have found that most cost-effective method is doing studying the disease through fecal sample collection. So we haven't been coloring or tagging birds since 2013, basically. But we have found a lot of valuable information, such as bar-headed goose travel 5,000 kilometers from Mongolia, Huvsgol province of Mongolia, over Himalayas to India. And that is one of the GPS coloring, or we also do different numbered plastic collars with large numbers, and we also retrieved a lot of photos from India of our birds. And then obviously larger birds like swans and geese migrate from Mongolia into China, South Korea, North Korea, those regions. And then little shorebirds, they travel even to Australia, which is the largest migration.
Wow. So that's a lot of species that WCS Mongolia has focused research on over the years. How are those species targeted, and why exactly are they chosen for conservation research?
So tradition of WCS, when Dr. George Scheller was in Mongolia, he identified several species that are high focus, that Mongolia should be protecting and should take pride in those species. There was a Mongolian gazelle because of the large migration. This is the largest mega herd migration phenomenon basically in the world, because you know, this kind of intact grassland is nowhere existing besides Africa and Mongolia. But even Serengeti is protected, you know, national park is size-wise, it's very small compared to Mongolia. So Mongolia still remains large intact grasslands, which should be high focus of us Mongolians to take pride and to protect it. And other species such as gobi bears, wild camels, snow leopards, saiga antelopes were all also identified by Dr. George Scheller, often important species. And therefore, we have started, like I mentioned before, with Mongolian gazelle research in ecology, as well as disease research in Mongolia since 2000. And since then, we have been expanding from Eastern Steppe into now we are working in South Gobi, where the Ayutolga mine exists. We're doing a lot of core biodiversity monitoring offset projects in partnership with Ayutolga mine.
That's fascinating. So obviously mining is probably one of the most environmentally impactful sectors in Mongolia and perhaps throughout the world. Tell me about how that collaboration began and how exactly you're able to have a mutually beneficial relationship with Oyu Tolgoi.
So we have Business and Conservation Director, Dr. Ray Victorine, and he's been visiting Mongolia early in 2000, and we have been organizing meetings in Ulaanbaatar as well as in South Gobi, discussing responsible mining and offsets, how the offsets should be implemented and what are the international expertise in offsets. And based on all of that meetings, discussions, we have started engaging with Ayutolga mine. And we have been providing from the beginning a lot of research ideas that this kind of core biodiversity monitoring should be in importance, especially to collect a lot of information, that the baseline species information that has to be done by every mine, essentially before the mine starts. Unfortunately, at this time, in Mongolia, there is no existing companies that already have baseline information of species or the biodiversity in the region. So Ayutthaya is the first mine that is taking responsibility and really following the IFC performance standards that are closely following their regulations and trying to comply and fulfilling all the necessary research that has to be completed, as well as developing their biodiversity management plans in accordance with the regulations. So they have one of the highest standard environmental research work being done.
Tell us about some of the offsetting programs that WCS Mongolia has already initiated in partnership with OT.
So there are three main offset programs we are implementing currently, one of which is anti-poaching project. So this project is basically focused on the small Gobi protected area in South Gobi and supporting protected area rangers to do better monitoring of the protected areas, protecting the species, collecting the information, as well as tying the protected area officers into environmental officers of South Gobi. Not only environmental, even law enforcement officers. So we have created multi-agency teams of law enforcement agencies so they can patrol monthly, regularly, poaching of wildlife species in the region, so they can report it. We have a regional specialist, Dr. Tony Lynham, who is a world-known expert on especially on anti-poaching. He has implemented a lot of programs in Africa, Southeast Asia, and one of the latest programs we're implementing in Mongolia is called SMART, Special Monitoring Reporting Tool. This is smartphone-based. It is an online free program that you can download and use. But it also has a lot of different applications that are added onto the program each year. And so we are using smartphones for rangers to collect information on their patrols, monitoring key biodiversity species they find, as well as hotspot for poaching areas. And based on that information, the park management can identify their routine monthly activities.
Wow, so that's a pretty comprehensive multi-stakeholder program to target both poaching and anti-trafficking. There's also some anti-trafficking projects WCS Mongolia does.
Yeah, so we have a U.S. Department of State funded project which is called Counter Wildlife Trafficking. And this project basically it's a very brief project, but it's trying to identify a national status. Do we have a lot of wildlife trafficking going on from Mongolia into neighboring countries? And what is our national capacity? What is our equipment and supplies to detect wildlife trafficking? Do law enforcement agents have expertise and knowledge to identify critical wildlife species that shouldn't be traded? So we are about to enroll that national survey yet. And we'll know the results. Is the trafficking is a main problem? Is there a network? So we'll identify that by the end of next year. And we'll provide a national strategy, what would be the for Mongolian law enforcement officers to follow in order to stop, if there is wildlife trafficking, in order to stop it, detect it, and to respond rapidly.
So who are the key partners in that project?
For that project, there is a working national counter wildlife trafficking national working group established, headed by the General Agency for Specialized Inspection and General Police, the Border Defense Agency, the Intelligence Agency, customs, general customs are all working group members.
Wow. You work with so many different stakeholders and partners throughout these projects.
Yes.
How do you keep them all straight?
So we have over 20 staff, and a lot of our project managers manage projects in detail, and I provide overall supervision and guidance and support as much as possible.
Let's talk about you a little bit. So how did you get into the field of conservation, and when did you start at WCS Mongolia as director?
So I started working for WCS in 2007. My first position was wildlife epidemiologist. So I'm a veterinarian by profession, and during my graduate study at UC Davis, I studied more of wildlife and interface disease. So my graduate study focus was on foot and mouth disease, which is a disease of concern. It is primarily livestock disease, but also can impact wildlife populations such as Mongolian gazelle. And because of my graduate work, I got connected with WCS. And during my graduate studies, I have been attending Mongolian gazelle annual meetings in Mongolia organized by WCS, where international experts have been invited and discussing which are critical disease issues, how to address those, which are critical research that has to be completed, and management activities for conservation and protection.
Right, so you studied at the University of California at Davis in the School of Veterinary Medicine.
School of Veterinary Medicine.
Yeah, that's a very prestigious program. That's
yes.
one of the world's leading programs in this field. Congratulations.
Thank you.
When did you return from your studies there to Mongolia?
In 2007. And I, after returning to Mongolia, I joined WCS right away.
Directly, as director?
No, like I mentioned, I joined WCS as wildlife epidemiologist, and I worked in that position until basically 2012. In 2012, I received deputy director position at WCS in Mongolia, and then in 2013, I was acting director, and became country program director in 2017. Yeah.
Great. And what's the future hold as the country director here for WCS Mongolia? Tell us a little bit about some of the initiatives moving forward that this office is most excited about.
So we have a lot of well-trained professionals within WCS Mongolia. Most of them have been, for their graduate studies, have been trained in the US, in Europe, in Japan. So very well-trained, very highly educated people, and who are true to conservation, and we want to make a difference in Mongolia. We want to preserve this beautiful land, this beautiful nature, just as it is today, so we can hand it down to our next generations. This is our desire, but Mongolia is large, and we cannot reach to all corners of Mongolia. Even within the selected areas of Gobi, southeastern grasslands and Gobi grasslands, we cannot reach every province and every corner of Mongolia. So we're trying to develop a model that can provide landscape conservation. So there are a lot of threats within this large region which conservation organizations cannot compete, such as agricultural development, intensive agriculture, mining, especially in the eastern grasslands, hay preparation, oil mining and extractions. So all of this is obviously a lot of threat in order to keep the grassland intact. But if we work along with the mining company, along with the agricultural company, development companies, along with governors of Amex, and along with professionals of protected area, we can make a change. But we need a very strong support from the government. Because of the government structure is changing rapidly and people are changing, it's a big challenge for us to create long-lasting relationships and long-lasting strategies that both NGOs and the government can fulfill together. So this is currently the fallback of Mongolian government. The government is not stable and there are no lasting policies and strategies in place, especially in these large grasslands. Grassland seems like it's invaluable to the eyes of decision makers, but there is so much behind this grassland. There is habitat of small rodent species, wild critical species. There are habitat of steppe birds. It is a key habitat of these large migratory ungulates of Mongolian gazelle, goiter gazelle, the Holland, the Przewalski horse, the gobi bears, the snow leopards, the ibex argali. You know, it's a large habitat, and these are key iconic species that is in Central Asia. And majority of the species, 80% of global population is within Mongolia. So we have a huge responsibility in front of ourselves, in front of world, in front of international organizations, and that we have to protect the species. We have to dedicate efforts, we have to dedicate resources, we have to develop national plans and strategies on how to do we protect the species. And I want to highlight again the crisis of Mongolian saiga antelope was huge. WWF, WCS, we have spent a lot of years of doing research, trying to identify, understand how the population regenerates, what is the key threat to the species, how to protect. But then it's not due to poaching, it's not due to climate impact. It was a disease. People did not estimate or understand disease could have this large impact and could cancel 2 decades of conservation activities. We have spent so much efforts and capacity and funding, international funding into conservation. So we do not want to see this kind of crisis through Mongolia. We will have to protect the species. But in order to protect the species from disease, we have to also work with local veterinary officials, with local veterinarians and herders. Herders are our eyes that they can identify if things are not going wrong, if there are mortalities within wildlife populations. They are the first ones to report. So we have to encourage herders' education, knowledge, and involvement in conservation.
What are some of the programs to educate and inform citizens that WCS is currently undertaking? One that I read about on the website is actually this nomadic nature trunk program. That's an interesting undertaking. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, this nomadic nature trunk is a small effort we dedicate to in order to train local herders, from local herders as old as 80 or 90 years old down into kindergarten age children. Anyone can take training and listen to, participate in the interactive games, listen to lessons and play puzzles and games and learn a lot of important information on the food chain, that all species are connected to each other, about being clean and not trashing and recycling the garbages, about habitat protection, how important habitat in order to preserve and keep this species. What are the key species in the region? So based on the region, we identify key species like in the eastern steppe, Mongolian gazelle in the Gobi, Holland and goiter gazelle in the western region where we work, saiga would be the critical species. So we identify iconic species, and based on that species we provide training, why important habitat is important, why other species are important, what ecological contribution this species provides into the grassland, etc. This kind of information is distributed. But throughout our projects, we do a lot of education of herders and local people. We do a lot of support events in the areas. Like in Dornod, we have organized for the 9th year biodiversity event. And that is dedicated to World Biodiversity Day. And we collect school children, and we do a lot of education on environmental laws, ecological information. We do quizzes, tests, and children's art competition. And at the national level, we also organize celebrating World Wildlife Day, and we're organizing also among high school children art competition, Wildlife of Mongolia Through My Eyes, and you can see some of the samples of competition art, how talented and how creative children are, and they see a lot of there is need to be a tie between people and the nature. There needs to be balance between development and conservation and environment. So they are very smart. There haven't been any ecological trainings organized for the children, but they still see all of it and creatively show it through their paintings.
That's fantastic. So you're not the only organization, obviously, working on these issues. Could you tell me how the community of conservation organizations here in Mongolia collaborate, and for example, who decides which species to focus on? Because obviously there are limited resources. I know there are regular meetups and a lot of good rapport between the various NGOs in town. But could you speak a little bit about some of the work of your colleagues in other organizations and the community at large?
Yes, so there is a large community, obviously, of conservation organizations in Mongolia. We basically meet with each other a lot, often during large workshops, meetings. Someone organizes and we all meet there and we discuss what's going on. Or these meetings usually focused on certain projects and certain plans that in mind. So on October 31st, there will be the National Rangeland Forum that will be organized by Swiss Development Cooperation Agencies, Green Gold and Livestock Health Project. So during that event, these kind of events, we often meet. And major conservation organizations are TNC, WWF, ZSL, Zoological Society of London, Snow Leopard Trust. So we work collaboratively, and recently you also participated in Dalnzadot. In May, we organized the first biodiversity conference in southern Gobi, and during participated in our co-organized with Ayatollah Mine and with the South Gobi Environmental Protection Agency and the Governor's Office. During that, you could see all the conservation communities that are working in the Gobi were present and discussing what research they have done and talking what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, what needs to be done next. So through this kind of large meetings and forums, we do discuss what are the critical problems. And usually most organizations have their own area of priority species and regions they focus, just like WCS, we focus in grassland and Gobi steppe and migratory ungulates of Mongolia. Other organizations do have their own focus areas and expertise. So based on that, like Snow Leopard Trust would be focusing more on snow leopards and their prey species like argali, ibex, etc. And based on that, we just try to collaborate. If, for example, in Namgonsum of South Gobi, it's the easternmost habitat of snow leopards. And it is the communities we are working on sustainable wildlife-friendly Kashmir project. And we want to develop more information on the population of the snow leopards in the area, how to educate the locals. So we are also partnering with snow leopard. In the Saiga Range region, we are partnering with WWF. In the larger scale, TNC developed gap analysis, and they are looking at which are the areas, critical, important biodiversity areas, to expand the protected areas, etc. So there is a larger conservation network that through meetings, through between organization MOUs, we collaborate and partner and try to stretch our resources so we can reach into larger areas.
It's very noble work. Thank you so much. Yeah, on behalf of someone who really loves the outdoors and appreciates Mongolian wildlife, I'm really grateful for organizations like yours, and I'm lucky. Yeah, full disclaimer, I've also been working in limited capacity with WCS and with Enke on a number of communications programs, including that conference in Dalanskad. And it's been a pleasure to work with you. It's fantastic to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Thank you for inviting.
My pleasure. So that does it for today's episode. I'm your host, Peter Bittner. That was Ш.Энхтүвшин Чилек-Дамба, the country director of the Wildlife Conservation Society, Mongolia. You can join us on Facebook at Talk With Me Star TV Mongolia. You can also watch this episode and many others at home on YouTube at Star TV HD. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you again next time. Bye.